no question about it. I am ready to get hurt again.
And we're back. It's been so long, Chris. We are back and we're at it with my main man, Joe Shaw. We're talking Miami Fusion. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can tell things look just a little bit different. Not so much Rosa Negra, a little more blue and what is that, yellow or gold, Joe? What am
It's
I looking
yellow.
here?
Yellow. It was
That's
a little
yellow.
gold in some kits, but primarily yellow.
There we go. So blue and yellow. We kind of did it up. I got my Miami Fusion jersey on. Joe has his Miami Fusion on. I don't know what the hell Chris is rocking, but
I'm rocking
ready.
a Brooklyn,
We're ready. Brooklyn
Brooklyn
Dodgers
Dodgers
hat?
hat with a regular white shirt. I was gonna wear my Wu-Tang hat since it is also Wu-Tang Wednesday, and that's got some yellow on it too. But I felt it was appropriate to rock the blue and yellow.
So, all right. So, Joe, thank you for joining us. I've been looking forward to this. I told you that we kind of had like a set where we go Tuesdays. We usually talk about the game before. Wednesdays, we preview the game after. So, I thought today would be the perfect day because we have no game coming up. I mean, obviously, something just randomly popped up today with the trade talk, but we had nothing planned for today. So, I thought today was the perfect day because we've been listening to your show since it got started. Back, it was in January that you dropped the first episode. And,
Yeah, we actually dropped the first episode March 15th of this year, which
Was
is
it
25
January?
years. No, I started recording back then, started hyping, trying to get, people aware.
Because I remember you
yeah.
contacted me in January.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right, and you've had 3 episodes, the latest dropping today.
Yep.
So we wanted to have you on, and I mean, I guess let's just start out with, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well. It's crazy to think that 25 years ago, this club came to Miami and said, "Hey, I think Miami deserves some football down here in South Florida. Let's do it up. Let's make it right." It took a couple years to get really going until that 2001 magical year when they won the Supporter Shield, and then boom, it was gone. As quickly as it was here, it was gone, and not until Inter Miami came did we get the opportunity to bring football back to South Florida. So I'm excited. Anytime I get to talk about classic MLS, vintage soccer, I geek out about this all day. I grew up, I'm in Dallas. So I grew up going to the Cotton Bowl, the Dallas, where I was a ball kid in 98, throwing balls out to Jorge Campos as he's running up and down the field with a baseball cap on. I mean, just crazy stories like you wouldn't believe. Saw an Olympico by Damian Alvarez and an 8-1 loss to the Galaxy. That was wild. So just anything, I'm doing some deep cuts.
You're a historian.
People. Yes, I try to be it. So I love it. I love talking about this.
So before we get into the specifics of the Miami Fusion, and Chris, before you get to your question, I did have just one quick question before getting started. Were you a Miami Fusion fan back in the late 90s?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought that you were a Dallas fan.
I am. So I'm a Texan born and bred, but something that I think is really cool and unique about MLS is because the league is relatively young compared to all of the other leagues. You see a lot of unification of support for different clubs. I mean, you even see it in the CONCACAF Champions League, right? People are like, look, I don't like LAFC, but I want them to win. I don't like Philadelphia, but I'm here to support them. You saw a lot of that last year with Seattle when they won the Champions League. And you don't get a lot of that in other leagues, even in other American sports leagues. So for me, I watched the Fusion play and I fell in love. And it didn't hurt that Jim Rooney, who did the first episode, he's a family friend. So there's a connection there. Shout out to his brother, Al. He's a really good friend. And so that was sort of an in for me to start following the team and then watching them play. My God, the 2001 season. I mean, you think you like Barcelona, you need to watch the 2001 Fusion. It was boom, 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 goal. Other team didn't even see the ball.
Well, and I appreciate what you just said, because that's something that you do see a lot in the MLS, in difference to, like, for example, in like the Premier League. It's like a crime to not like more than one team or whatever. And that's just from my perspective, what I've noticed, that there's a lot of fans that are fans of one team, and it's like a crime to even consider any other team just a little bit decent. Like everybody else has to be crap compared to that one team that you have to enjoy because they've been around for like 200 years, right? So I definitely understand your point of view when it comes to that. And it's crazy because you have a lot of people that, hey, if you're not a fan of your local team, or if you are a fan of your local team, I mean, FC Dallas, they're on the West Coast. So, I mean, you can have your opportunity of picking an East Coast, team. Like, for example, I like LAFC, right? So it's not far-fetched
Front runner.
what you're saying. Yeah, well, it's not front runner. Isn't front runner being like with the Seattle Sounders? Aren't they like the greatest Western Conference team of
LAFC
like all
literally
time?
are the champions right now.
Yeah, but I like them before they won that championship.
It's the black and gold. I mean, it's something about
Yeah.
those
It is
jerseys,
super
right? They have-
clean,
it-
super
it's,
clean.
They had Great Gatsby-esque. If anybody saw the Great Gatsby movie, right, the poster, there were
Yes.
shades of
And
that
the
in the jersey
logo is
stuff.
really clean
Oh,
also.
It
yes,
is.
it's very clean.
All right.
So,
So
go ahead, Danny.
the Miami Fusion. Let's get into it. First inaugural season, 1998. I believe they made the playoffs. Right?
Yes, they made the playoffs.
Wasn't that hard to make it, but they were
No.
overshadowed by Chicago that year, weren't they?
Yes. So, and for those who don't know, right, and MLS started, and this light, I apologize, I keep fiddling with it because it keeps messing me up. We're just gonna leave it off. We're gonna leave it off.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
All good.
MLS started in 1996, right? You had 10 teams enter in the league. And then 2 years after it got going, you had Ken Horowitz say, hey, I want to exercise an option to buy a team, bring it into South Florida to have the Fusion. And alternatively, you had Phil Anschutz exercise his option to bring another club into MLS. He had already owned one. I think he owned a couple at that point. And so he brought in the Chicago Fire. So they both came in at the same time. And yeah, Chicago did the double that year. They won the Open Cup and the MLS Cup in 98, dominated the league. And the Fusion, they got there. They got to the playoffs. 4 out of 5 teams in each conference made the playoffs, but they didn't really make any noise. They had Carlos Valderrama, as their main draw, main attraction. He wasn't really enjoying life in Miami. In 99, he has to be traded back to the Tampa Bay Mutiny, the other Florida team. And so it really took the Fusion a couple of years to find their identity and really stand apart as a unique team instead of just another MLS team.
And one of the
answer Richard Greenberg's question,
Yes.
just real quick. He asked if me or Chris had ever been to a Fusion game. I'm actually Colombian, and I'm a big Pio Valderrama fan. I actually had a Pio Valderrama birthday cake when I was 8 years old, to let you know how big of a fan I was.
Yes.
So yes, I went to one Fusion game, and it was literally just to go see Pio Valderrama. But that's all I went to, and after that game, I never went back. That's the good old
And I've
Lockhart
been-
Stadium.
Yes.
And I've been to 0.
Well,
There you go.
I like that, Daniel, you brought up Lockhart Stadium, because what a lot of people don't know, which I didn't, and let me back up for those that may be
Go for
wondering,
it.
like, why are we doing this episode? Well, we're doing this episode because the Fusion were incredible, right? But we're also doing this episode to honor the history of Major League Soccer and the teams and the players that laid the foundation for the fact that we get to talk about, or y'all get to talk about Inter Miami. I get to listen, right? Inter Miami every week on the Battered Herons podcast, along with other people. And I think as the league continues to grow, people start to forget about some of these stories and clubs and legacies that came before. And it's a shame, because we really should remember the fact that Alex Pineda-Chacon won the Golden Boot and the MVP in one season, and his second place finisher was Diego Sarno, who played on the same team with him, right? So like, they both were on the Miami Fusion. They both dominated together. They were a 1-2 punch combo. And
he didn't even start at the beginning of the season, and he still
That is
won
correct.
the Golden Boot.
That is correct. So the Fusion, when I realized it was, and for me, I'm a storyteller. I have a couple other podcast projects. I got my undergrad degree in theater. I enjoy doing this, but I love highlighting other people's stories. And so when I saw it was 25 years since the Fusion came in, I was like, boom, perfect opportunity to
timing.
just talk to people. So the podcast 25 for 25 really is the story of the Miami Fusion from those who lived it. Talk to players, talk to coaches. The episode that dropped today with assistant coach John Trask is incredible. I highly recommend people listen to it. We're talking to staffers. I actually just recorded an episode with Alex Pineda-Chacon himself. I'll tell some of those stories. He's a wonderful, wonderful dude. He's just hilarious and funny and really
He's
kind
improved
and
his
generous.
English.
Yes. but that's what we're doing, right? So with this podcast, and you had asked about, you had mentioned Lockhart Stadium. And so I think it's
Yes.
important to know, I didn't know this until I started doing research for this podcast earlier in the year. But while the Columbus Crew Stadium in 1999 was the first official soccer-specific stadium that was designed and built for the purposes of being a quote-unquote soccer-specific stadium, Lockhart Stadium came first. And Lockhart Stadium was designed to be a soccer-specific stadium. It was not originally built, so the technicality, it's Columbus. But Ken Horowitz wanted to go into the Orange Bowl, but the mayor said you got to sign a 10-year lease to play in the Orange Bowl. And Ken said, look, this league is 2 years old. I don't know if it's going to make it. I don't know if the team's going to make it. I need a more flexible contract. They had a fallout. He went to Lockhart Stadium, but he also was like, this isn't big enough. We need to upgrade the seats. We need 20,000 seat capacity, paid out of pocket to make some of those changes happen, and retrofitted it to be a soccer specific stadium. And Lamar Hunt came to get specs and to understand how he was doing it, which informed some of the planning that went into the Columbus Crew design. So that's something that a lot of people don't know. Miami was really a trendsetter in so many ways.
That's interesting. No, I did not know any of that.
And Lockhart Stadium, a lot of fans that were fans of the MLS in the early days, especially of Miami Fusion, they talk about Lockhart Stadium as if it was like the Mecca. And it must have been a very good environment to watch a soccer game in, because a lot of people miss that stadium. They miss that experience.
You know, it was intimate. And when I go back and watch some of the footage and a lot of the games, especially from that 2001 season. So for those that don't know, in 2001, the Miami Fusion's last season before they were contracted by MLS, they won the Supporter Shield. They dominated the entire league. They only lost, it was 3 or 4 matches, 5 games. Thank you. Then would have won MLS Cup. There's some chatter about, we were up against Landon Donovan, the Golden Boy, in the San Jose Earthquake. So, make of that what you will, is what different people say. But they should have won MLS Cup that year. They definitely won the Supporter Shield. And then boom, they were gone. But in that season, attendance ticked up. The environment was intimate. You were pretty much on the field watching the game.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard another environment in America described, except for when I watched the game at Q2 Stadium, and the guy I was with said, this reminds me of the old Lockhart Stadium. It's slanted right there on the field. We can feel the action. It's exciting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why people, beyond the nostalgia factor, right, and beyond the fact it was a winning season, I think that is another reason why people yearn for sort of the old Lockhart Stadium feel.
Well, you brought up your latest episode with John Trask.
Yep.
And I haven't had a chance to listen to it because it just dropped today, so I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. But he worked alongside Ray Hudson. Now, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, right, because you've gotten to talk to a lot of these guys now, Ray Hudson wasn't necessarily an X's and O's guys. Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Ted Lasso, but what I imagine is that Ray Hudson is Ted Lasso, and John Trask would be the Beard, the X's and O's guy. Is that more or less how things went down in 2000, 2001?
It's very similar. It's John brought this up, and it's actually really interesting because I also brought this up when I was recording with Alex Pineda-Chacon, and I got both of their perspectives. So I'll try and blend some of that. John shared a story in the episode about when he got hired by Ray. So John was a college coach, national championship winning college coach, had never coached in the pros. And Ray had just gotten appointed and need to overhaul some of his staff. He was looking for an assistant. John threw his name in the hat. Ray said, come on down to Florida. Let's interview. Shows up at Ray's house. Ray doesn't interview him. He gestures him into the living room. He turns on the European Championships because it's summer 2000. And he's silent. They're just watching the game. They're watching England play Portugal. They're watching the Neville brothers. John couldn't remember which one. I asked him, I'm like, is it Phil Neville? Was it Phil Neville? Were you watching Phil Neville? He was like, I don't remember. It was one of them. I'm like, but was it Phil Neville? And he said he's watching them and they're playing garbage. And John just says, look at this pub player. And then he's like, oh, I just criticized this British player to a British coach. Is that it? And Ray looks at him and is like, yeah, he is playing poor. And just going on. And then and he looks at John and he says, all right, I'm asking you a couple of questions. John said, I kind of blacked out. I don't remember them. But he said the first one he asked him was like, okay, you're good at college, but can you coach pros? I need somebody that can coach pros. And that's exactly it. He brought him in. The interview went well. Ray canceled all the other interviews. He only interviewed John, flew him up to Florida, flew him back. He went home. And then Ray called him the next day and said, I need you to get your ass to Florida. We got work to do. And so they came in, and that's exactly it. John Trask and Eric Eichmann were tasked with doing the training, sort of the X's and O's and the positional pieces. And Ray was the motivational man. He would come in and he was the psychological factor. Alex Manea-Chacon said he was good with the psychology. Yeah, I see that comment. Yeah, he was like Ted Lasso. He was not just an inspirational figure, but he knew that most of the game, he knew these guys knew how to play. He knew that he just needed to put them on the field and tell them to go and have fun. But he said, I need them in the right mindset and mentality to be able to go and play. If I'm overworking them, if I'm overcoaching them, if I'm looking at this data too much or that, they're not going to be successful. That was his approach, and it worked. He had the right players.
We love Ray Hudson down here in South Florida, obviously, right? Now, and I'm going to let Chris get to your question, but real quick, just to be clear, Ray Hudson had a relationship with these players because before he was the manager, he was in the broadcast booth, wasn't he? So he kind of had a relationship with them, was in the broadcast booth, and from the broadcast booth, went down to the sideline.
Traveling with them.
Yep. So Jim Rooney brought up the fact in the first episode that Ray was not only, he was in the announce booth, he was calling the games, and also he
was traveling with the team.
He was traveling with the team. He was their community relations person. He was going to schools, elementary schools, and bringing guys like Jim and Jeff Cassar in.
Those stories that he was talking about with kids and then involving the teachers, that was fantastic because I pictured it as a kid.
Episode 1, guys.
Yep. And you guys got to catch it. You guys got to catch it. It's the first episode, and it's the first one you're gonna love of many. And when I saw that, I felt like a kid in a class where you involve the teacher, and they're no, we got to get him to do this, and like
you can imagine Ray Hudson running that too.
Oh my goodness! And I imagine that Ray is just reveling in the experience. So that says a lot. And just like how AV Alfonso just brings up that he was like a renegade coach back then, had the best post-match sound bites. I mean, Ray Hudson, just talking about Ray Hudson, he has the best sound bites, like, period. He can fart in a toilet, and it might be the best fart I've ever heard in my life.
It would definitely be magisterial.
Right.
All right. Chris, did you have something? Because I was going to ask another question, but I know you have a couple things you want to ask.
The thing is, I didn't want to fast forward too much, but Richard Greenberg is just coming in with dimes for questions. And so Richard Greenberg asks, was the Fusion's problem was that they didn't have an owner with enough money?
So this question is interesting because there's a few different stories out there. So I think one that I've heard some variation of from different players and coaches and different people while doing the research for this. And then also there's a good book I'm gonna recommend folks read.
Yeah.
It's The United States of Soccer by Phil West. MLS and the Rise of American Soccer Fandom. So it was published in 2017, I believe. Someone can fact check me. But within that book, he's the one that brings up the soccer specific retrospective or retrofitting of the stadium.
Yeah.
And he also talks about the fact that Ken Horowitz went to the league and said, look, I feel like I'm bleeding money. I feel like I'm not making enough from a sponsorship perspective. Ticket sales did dip in 98 and from 98 to 99, and then from 99 to 2000 with the poor performances on the field, or the average performances. But in 2001, they went back up, but from an ownership perspective, it was still not enough. And so I think what people need to remember, which is unfortunate, but from a context perspective, I think if you have that same situation nowadays, an owner is going to feel that they have the ability to kind of wait it out a bit and let things resettle. This is 2001. The league is not even 10 years old. And there's already discussions that Tampa Bay is likely to get folded as well, because it's a league-owned team. It's not making any money, and it's poor on the field. And it was just a shame. But yeah, so it was money troubles tied to ownership from and I wouldn't say trouble, is more of a financial decision by the owner that they wanted to kind of cut their losses and move on, which is unfortunate for the players and the coaches.
Well, and I see Richard asking and you brought it up just a couple seconds ago about MLS owning, I guess, Tampa Bay. And did they take over the ownership of the team of Miami Fusion? Which I'd like to respond to Richard Greenberg. Go listen to the podcast. Okay. I mean, if you want to answer it, you can go right ahead, Joe. But you'll find that answer immediately in the first episode.
Yeah, so the league took over some of the decisions right at the end, but really most of the ownership decisions were still being driven by Ken Horowitz and his company and his entity. It was their expansion slot, which I believe they bought the team for $20 million, which is cheap compared to some of the teams that come in now. But yeah. Yes, I see Richard Greenberg's dropping dimes over here. Long Range Goals by Bo Dure. I also have that book as well. So yes, good call out. It's too far away in the room.
Richard Greenberg is our friend from the up north. He is from Toronto, but he tunes in, and we appreciate Richard coming from north of the border.
And he asked the question. He asked the question. This is going to be quick, Danny, and then you can get to it. But he asked the question quickly. Did the Fort Lauderdale Strikers actually play in Lockhart Stadium? Do you know?
I don't actually know that. I would need someone to fact check me. I know they may have played in Lockhart Stadium. If they did, it was at the reduced capacity. But I did know, obviously, they played in Fort Lauderdale, hence the name Fort Lauderdale Strikers.
Oh, yes.
And that's where, making that connection, that's where Ray Hudson played as well, which is where he started building up a following in the fan base and the community, is being such a dynamic personality and player back in the old NASL days.
Now, on one of the episodes, I don't remember if it was which of the episodes that I listened to it was, but you said that there was a point where you guys thought that it wouldn't be Miami that folded, that it was possibly Dallas that was going to fold along with Tampa. Now, I had never heard that before. So is there a chance that maybe Miami wasn't going to fold, that it was going to be Dallas instead?
So there was some chatter that I heard that, and this was just to put into context for people, I think the league was trying to figure out how they can restructure some of the debt and still maintain the league, because MLS was pretty hell-bent on not collapsing and folding like the NASL. And so they recognized they were losing money. People were playing out of football stadiums. They weren't selling it out. And they didn't have sort of the built-in brand appeal that exists today. So they were trying to decide what to do. Folding a couple of teams made financial sense. And for a long time, Dallas was a league-owned team. And so if you're looking at sort of what's the easy shops to close, the league-owned teams, they don't have to consult with an owner at that point. You can just make that decision.
Shut it down.
Then Lamar Hunt and Hunt Sports Groups came in and purchased the Dallas Burn at the time. They already had Columbus, and then I think they also had Kansas City at the time. The Kansas City Wizards, now supporting KC. And then they bought Dallas because the Hunts are from here, and they wanted to make sure their hometown team didn't fold. And then eventually they sold off the Columbus Crew, and then Kansas City, and now they just have FC Dallas and MLS.
I had somebody here said, I heard that, I don't know how, if this was, I don't know if this is any truth to it. I heard that Ann Schultz wanted Ray as coach and pressured the league to fold Miami.
You know, I hadn't heard that one, so I'm not sure. What is interesting is, from Ray's perspective, he was such a passionate coach. There's an article that was written about when the Miami Fusion lost in the playoffs that year, that Ray was holding back tears in the press conference because he knew they were capable of so much more. And I think there's a sense that, you know, there's some discussion that John Trask mentions on the latest episode, that Ray had heard rumblings that it's the Miami's thinking about folding. John didn't know how much Ray knew at the time, but part of the holding back tears was definitely for the players and the play, but I think also tied to possibly knowing this might be it. Like, this is the last press conference for Miami. And in that press conference, though, ever being Ray, he talked about, this was a magical season. We're going to come back harder. We're going to come back faster. We're going to win multiple things next year. You haven't seen the last of us. I think he was almost maybe even daring the league, like, come on, you're not going to fold the best team in the league, right?
Right. Well, I think that's the surprise when you hear that they folded. You wouldn't expect that they're gonna end up dismantling the team that was literally in the regular season the best team in the league. Like it
Yeah.
makes no sense. Like,
Well,
was that never taken into consideration?
I think it was well. So I think it's also helpful for folks to remember that while the Supporter Shield was a noteworthy accomplishment, it didn't necessarily hold the same weight in a league perspective as it does
Because
today.
because the league was so small.
The league was so small, and the Supporter Shield wasn't. You didn't really get anything if you won. You got the honor of being the best team. You got home field advantage in the playoffs. You didn't get. I mean, it was a CONCACAF Champions Cup. You didn't get a league
Yeah.
spot. You didn't get all of these other accoutrements
Didn't
that
get that
go
big
with it.
plate.
You did get the big plate. I asked Jim Rooney about that, right? And he was like, no, I remember getting the big plate. And then sure enough, like, it's carved in there, 2001 winners, Miami Fusion. but yeah, that's maybe you can eat some dinner off the big plate, right? You got a crowd around. No, sorry.
That's
No
it.
disrespect intended. FC Dallas also won the Supporters Shield. I lost my mind that day. So it was incredible.
Look, Ray Hudson looks like he must have been one hell of a coach to play for. And there was a story that Jim Rooney told about the way Ray Hudson treated him, especially after a specific game in the locker room, that you guys have to go ahead and listen to it, because just listening to the way and kind of just because in South Florida we're such big fans of Ray Hudson, just imagining him in the locker room and the way Jim Rooney described that story, it's perfect. Like if we're all fans of Ray Hudson here. Go ahead and listen to that story or episode 1. It was awesome. All right. Now,
Yeah.
I just want to backtrack to one quick thing. Sorry, Chris.
Go ahead. You're good.
Because we talked about it, and I really wanted to know if you had the details, because I was a teenager. I really wasn't sure what the hell was going on. Why did Pibe Valderrama leave? Because that was soul crushing to me.
I've not gotten the official story from anybody that was involved in it yet. If I do, I'll put it out on the next an upcoming episode. The only thing that I can figure, right? He was further along in his career. He came to Tampa Bay when MLS started. He ended in Tampa Bay. I truly think he probably just liked Tampa Bay better for whatever purpose. Perhaps he had a house, maybe some family, maybe he had some additional roots. Sometimes players just like a place better, and there's really nothing you can do to change that. But it's interesting, I think. When there it is.
His jersey.
Yes. I've got it's not a Fusion jersey, but I do have
nice.
Jeff Cassar.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, no,
that
was before he got to Miami. That's before he got to Miami.
I think that was I'm trying to remember if that was 97 or if it was 02. No, that was in the 90s. So yeah, it was before he came to Miami. But when he was still playing with Garth Lagerwey.
And Jeff Cassar, one of the few players that played all 4 seasons with the Miami Fusion.
That's correct. Yep. That's right. He was the starting keeper in 98, 99. In 2000, the Fusion drafted Nick Raimondo, little known goalkeeper that I don't think ended up doing anything in the league. I'm not
Just
really
a blip
sure
on the radar.
what happened. Yeah. One and done. And so in 2000, Ray saw something special in Raimondo and made the switch and was like, look, we're not going to win a lot, but he's got something here. I need him to start. And he did, and he developed quickly. And then 2001, he was dominant. And Jeff is quite humble in his episode where he talks about, obviously you always want to play, but he said that team dynamic, the way Ray had structured it, we didn't really feel that sort of competition in the negative sense, right? It was a healthy competition. We're pushing each other. We're trying to be better. We want to play. We're not always going to play. But he started coaching Raimondo and being a mentor to Raimondo in 2000, which then led to 2009. Jeff Cassar is the goalkeeper coach for Real Salt Lake and has had that connection with Raimondo all the way through, and then helps Raimondo, plan and prep for PKs, which leads to RSL winning their MLS Cup championship.
Yeah.
Well, and Diego Serna played also during the whole time with the Miami Fusion as well, right?
That's correct.
which brings me to a point on well, a question I have, right? I noticed that he play well. You have Miami Fusion, and then in the little research that I've been able to do, I really haven't wanted to do too much research because I kind of want to be informed by Joe Shaw, because your podcast is literally informing me of just about everything that I know of Miami Fusion. But I noticed in my research there's actually a club called Miami Fusion FC that I guess was established in 2015 to 2017. There's even a Miami-Dade FC founded in 2014. So like there's been other Miami teams. I mean, even to the point that there's a Miami Fusion FC, which doesn't seem like it's like linked to the original Miami Fusion. Is that something that in your research that you've ever came across? Does that have any relation to Miami Fusion?
So what I've been able to determine is most of these clubs sort of came up and under different ownership groups and wanted to have some link and some mental link to what has come before. So you talked about Miami Fusion, right? So some of these clubs, I would have to double check, but some of them played I don't know if it was USL structured at that time or if it was still considered the A League or the USA. Well, USASA is amateur, but PDL in some of these groups, but essentially USL League 2 or League 1 type level, where these clubs want folks to remember the Miami Fusion, but also have a new logo, new color scheme, and say, look, but we're starting new. And as you said, those clubs didn't really last. You know, you've got Inter Miami and MLS now, and you've got what Miami FC is the USL club, correct? Yep.
And the funny thing is that Miami FC has like 7.5 fans that go to those games, and they're still thriving. Like I don't. That guy for sure is dealing with something with cocaine and hookers.
We have our suspicions that something fishy is going on over there.
Something fishy is going on.
Something fishy is going over there.
So, go ahead, Danny.
No, I was just gonna say Richard Greenberg asked a question that I believe you addressed in one of your episodes. I want to say is with Jim Rooney. Didn't Ray's Fusion team play the famous Dutch system of soccer? Lots of passing, like the old Barcelona teams. As long as everybody was disciplined and got back, I would assume, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So I think each of the guys touches on it in a different way. John Trask definitely goes into it on this week's episode. And he says, so he talks about, and actually when I was talking to Alex Pinilla-Chacon, he also talked about it and brought it up and said, but John mentioned that John was also loved the Johan Cruyff, the total football, the Barcelona style of play. And so when Ray was like, we're just going to let him go and this is what we're going to do, he was like, I'm all for it. And he said it got to be, so in answer to Richard's question, yes, that's exactly how they played. And if you look at the timelines, Miami was a little bit ahead of the time. So yes, it was the Barcelona, but it was really the total football style of play that the Dutch played in the 70s. And so the 70s, the 80s is when Ray's playing. He's around it. He likes it. It's informative, right? It's taken the world by storm. Why wouldn't you want to bring it? And especially into a league that had some successful teams, but you really didn't see that run and gun style. And in fact, Alex talked about when I was interviewing him, and so this will be in an upcoming episode, he said something that he learned as a player from Ray and from John and from Eric Eichmann, who were the coaches, but from Ray, and that he tries to instill in his players: don't be wasteful with the ball, protect the ball, play with the ball. You can play this fast style as long as you keep control of the ball, and where it ends is in the back of the net. Because if you're playing it this way and you're playing fast, the only way you can get hurt is if you give up the ball. Now you're tracking back, you're wasting energy. But if you play and you make the team chase you, then you're going to run them off the field and run them ragged, which is exactly what Miami Fusion did.
In 2001, that's what they,
Well, and speaking of 2001, Louis C just chimes in and says the 2001 Miami Fusion was the greatest MLS team of all time. So,
that's right. That's what we're saying.
And going back to looking at their record and information and statistics, I mean, they literally were. And then we got Pete Abronsky. He's asking me, please tell me you'll be interviewing Ian Bishop.
I was texting with him just today. I am going to be interviewing Ian Bishop, the classic West Ham player who brought that bone crunching and fast playing style to Miami. And in fact, this is another fun story. I talked to Alex and I was remembering a specific goal sequence that I couldn't quite remember when it happened, but I remember watching it as a kid. And he said, "Oh, I remember when that was. That was my first game that I played. I got brought on. It was the game against Colorado." And he's just like, boom, 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 remembering this. And he said, "There's a foul in the build up to the play. He sees Ian Bishop go to start the indirect free kick and just put a palm on the ball. And he said, I immediately go, this guy's a player. I need to get open." And he starts running. And he said, I turn my hips to where I can accept the ball and immediately shoot. And Colorado's walking around. He said they're walking around like what? Some promenade. They want some carnival. Like, I don't know what they're waiting on. And he puts a palm on. The ref is like, you're good to go. He lobs the ball to me. I take it. Boom. Goal. Finish. Colorado's turning around going, what just happened? What just happened? He's like, that's how quick. He said everybody in the team was that quick. But Ian Bishop specifically had that mentality. And Jim Rooney talks about Ian Bishop was his partner, his midfield partner that he loved to play with. So yeah, they are good buddies.
I had a question for you. Are you gonna stop it at exactly 25 episodes?
That was the original plan. I will say the original plan was I wanted to talk to 25 people that wanted to share their stories. We're putting together an oral history of the team. I got some other ideas in the works for how we're going to distill that into another consumable format for folks. But what's been fun to me is the amount of people that have sort of come out of the woodwork to be like, oh, hey, I was the head of, communications or media relations for all years. Hey, I also covered the team, but I worked for MLS and this is my capacity. Hey, I was, the team mom. Right, the woman that Jim Rooney and Jeff Cassara have talked about before.
Yes, I heard about her.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah, so going to be talking to her, and so we're talking about different people that the fusion was a huge part of their lives, and it's so cool hearing sort of the same beats from a different point of view, and you get the full picture. And what I've found and what I love, and I think this is probably clear, but what I want people to know, the reason why this matters and that we're bringing this up is because this impacted so many people in such a profound way that they felt. I mean, y'all talk about La Familia at the Inter Miami games, and people talk about they lived that, they felt that. There's a guy I was talking to that was a fan. He didn't have an official title. He wasn't on staff. And Jim and Jeff and John and Alex, they're talking about, oh yeah, I know that guy. He went on trips with us. We loved him. We brought him in. We invited him to the cookouts and the barbecue because we were all a family. He said, that's how Miami is. That's how the community is. And we just felt at one. And so when that team gets ripped away, I mean, you're losing a significant portion of that family dynamic, and it's tough.
And it's not only that, but the interesting thing about your podcast is that it gives that oral history of not just the Miami Fusion, but MLS during that time period. And since you're getting it from so many different perspectives, it really does give you an insight very differently from those perspectives. And it gives you sort of a fresher look into actually what was happening during that time. So that's something that
and the Miami Fusion had quite the supporters group back then. Also, the aficionados were loud and proud, just like Vice City is now holding it down. And that was a big void that was left in a lot of people's hearts once the Miami Fusion left town. I wanted to go back just real quick. We were talking about the 25. It might be more than 25.
Right.
Do you have a grand finale set up? I only ask this because I understand you get who you can when you can. I get that. But I feel like the grand finale, like this is the last episode, has to be Ray Hudson, right? Like that's the grand, like you are my send-off.
I mean, but but Danny, now you're asking him to unveil the secret recipe here. I mean, are you sure about that? You sure you want to finish that question?
Let me tell you, I was hoping it was going to be episode number 1. I was like, okay, Jim Rooney is cool, but I want to hear Ray Hudson. But then I was like, well, you know what? The smart play might be that's the grand finale. You got to leave the best for last. Could you imagine Ray Hudson's storytelling? Like we had Fernando Fiore on last month, and he talked a lot about the Miami Fusion, and he's a great storyteller. We could have gone for 2-3 hours if he would have had the time. But I would imagine Ray Hudson is just as good, and he can go for just as long, if not longer.
You know, Fernando's actually going to be on the show, so I interviewed him as well. So that's when I talk about people in the community, right? That had different ties to the Fusion. Fernando is a perfect example of being around the team and being part of the team and covering the team,
being in the locker room.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I am not going to say what the last episode will be.
Good man.
I will say conversations are always ongoing. This whole project has evolved a lot faster and a lot differently in a positive way than I ever thought. Truthfully, I wanted this show to be out, and I was like, nobody's done this. I'll do it, and we'll put it out, and let's talk about it because this is important. And then I see you brought up Luis's comment about the aficionados, and I'm actually going to talk to him on the show as well, because he was at the Supporter Shield ceremony where he was given that big old plate, right, and was able to kind of accept it on behalf of the Fusion. So like, that's an incredible story, along with how the supporters groups have merged. Ken Horowitz, we'll see. I don't know if he would want to talk to me.
He's not going to want to come on there,
but you never know. You never know.
It's like what Joe is saying, right? Little by little, right? You had this idea, and you're picturing a decent sized tree, but then all these roots just start sprouting off, and you're like, whoa, this thing can actually be something more than what you projected in the 25 episodes. So yeah, man, good for you. Don't tell Danny a thing.
What I love about chronicling the history of the Fusion is that this is something that can live on forever, right? If 20 years down the line somebody's interested, you can go back and find these episodes, and they're still going to be as relevant in 20 years as they are right now. Whereas in, like, for example, the show that me and Chris do, after next week's game, nobody's coming back to listen to the preview episode a week ago that we did a week or two ago. Like, but what you're doing is going to be around and relevant for probably ever. So I really appreciate what you're doing, because it's gonna feed the knowledge of a lot of South Florida, for example, youngsters or people like Chris that weren't into soccer back then, and let them know the history of South Florida soccer like they didn't know existed. Because a lot of people just think it started with Inter Miami or with Miami FC over at FIU. They don't realize we had a squad 4 years back in the late 90s and early 2000s. We were probably one of the greatest MLS teams of all time. We were a very fun team. We were high scoring. And I mean, I don't know how you're going to do it, Joe, but you got to turn this into a documentary somehow. I'm just putting it out there. Like, it has to be on video format at some point.
I mean, you know, all I'm saying is MLS just signed a 10-year deal with Apple, and they may, you know, I'm just saying classic content
see the
is
writing
gold,
on the wall,
right? I mean, I'm just saying. And hey, what I'm trying to do, and so I'll share this to try and drum up support as well, is there's sort of two things that I'm trying to work on. So one is because of how this has evolved and because everybody is so excited, I'm trying to find an additional way for it to live on. So I am exploring the idea of pulling stuff into a book format, so people can read it and carry it with them and continue to share and pass it on, because realistically, we don't know, right, how technology evolves and changes. So that's a different way. So, you know, I will share stuff as I have it, as we go on. But the other part is we're trying to explore getting a Miami Fusion night at an Inter Miami game this year. So sort of two things we're trying to do.
For the last 2 years, I've been calling for it.
Exactly.
And a lot of people are telling me that they want no MLS won't approve of it, even though I don't see why MLS one would care, and for two, why Inter Miami would have to get permission for a themed night. But a lot of people say that because it was a failed franchise in the MLS, that it's a bad look. I think that we should embrace it.
I think it's all in how you frame it, right? So I think if Miami still didn't have a team, probably not. If it was the first year, probably not. But a lot has changed, right? This isn't the first year of Inter Miami. It's been around a bit, and you've got, it's 25 years. It's a nice round number. It's exciting. And if you position it as we are connecting what came before with what's to come, and we bill it as some excitement, we get the fans there, the supporters are already there, then it can work. And I think it can be successful. And Chris Henderson, former Fusion player, was part of that 2001
I was going to bring him up next. Yep.
He's aware of the show, is what I would say. And I'm hopeful that will help open some doors with doing a theme night. But we're looking at possibly doing a Miami Fusion theme night, and then also kind of a live panel podcast ish, but really like live panel discussion that we'll record upon the podcast with anybody that can come, right? Maybe that's Ray Hudson. Maybe we get Fernando there, we get Jim Rooney, we get
Fernando's
several
always at the
players.
stadium anyway, huh?
Exactly, right? So we get these players and staff, and we have the supporters come and get to talk to them and really get that closure. I've heard from so many people that they didn't feel as a supporter, they got to celebrate that supporter shield and that they got to say goodbye. And I think that's what we want to give fans is the opportunity to celebrate and say goodbye, and then put all of that energy into an Inter Miami championship, right? There's so many championships that we're playing for now. Let's win one of them.
Well, look, if obviously you have connects now that you're talking to people like Chris Henderson, if you've talked to him or not, and Fernando and Ray Hudson, and obviously you know people are talking to people much higher up than we are. But if we can assist in any way, you let us know, because like I said, every time I wear this jersey on this show, I bring it up, and I'm still hopeful that we're gonna have a throwback night for the Miami Fusion, because I feel like it's only right to connect the past to the future. So I've been calling for it, and if you can make it happen and I can help in any way, please let me know. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, and Danny, the one thing that you brought up earlier about how this, the podcast can be able to live on further for many, many, many years to come. You're talking about, for example, a person like myself who wasn't familiar with this sport, to be honest. I heard about Miami Fusion. I kind of knew little things here and there, or just in passing by. But when my son watched our podcast a couple weeks ago, and Danny played highlights of like the all-star little games or whatever, my son was like, oh, there was a Miami team before, because he thought it was Inter Miami only as well. So he started watching some of the highlights. He started seeing a little bit of Miami Fusion. So then his mind opened up. So that's the real cool thing about the experience that you're giving to a lot of the fans and a lot of the listeners.
I agree. And, I did see somebody had brought up, Richard Greenberg had brought up a moment ago, Johan Cruyff was the guy that brought the Total Football to Barcelona. So yes, I think I may have separated Barcelona and Total Football with Dutch, and Johan Cruyff. But yes, Johan Cruyff bringing it to Barcelona. So thank you for that correction.
Yeah. And one thing,
according to Richard Greenberg, also apparently Toronto FC also did honor the Toronto Metro Croatia in 1976 NASL Soccer Bowl champions. So it happens. It happens. I don't know when. Does anybody ever bring back the Metro Stars night? Because
I don't think that has happened. But I say, why not? Right? The Galaxy have leaned into their old colors. FC Dallas this year. It wasn't quite the jersey I was hoping for, but they do have the burn on the back of the neck,
yes,
right?
I did see that. Yes.
They do have the flame. So there's some I would say acceptance in leaning into those callback accoutrements on the jerseys.
Well, I'm down for having a Miami Fusion sort of throwback night. Let everybody try to buy a jersey. Give everybody Valderrama wigs.
Yes. Give Messi a Valderrama wig when he's here. Have him go out in it wearing that jersey that Daniel's got on. People won't even know. They'll be like, Valderrama's back. What is going on? I thought he was still in Colombia.
Put away the pink smoke bombs for a week. Bring out some blue and yellow smoke bombs. Yes. I could picture it in my head. I think it would be an awesome experience. Do like a blue out or a yellow out.
Yes.
Give away free shirts. Like, I think it would be an awesome night. I don't know. Chris Henderson, if you need ideas, come at your boy, because I've actually been thinking about this a lot more that I'm proud of, because it's never, well, everybody's telling me it's not going to happen, but I still pictured it in my head.
It's going to happen.
I got the blueprint. So you let me know, and we can make this happen. Happy to help.
That's right. Y'all got some GAM today. Let's just pull that into the Miami Fusion. No,
there you go. We got
too fresh.
Might as well
to play with.
Yeah, we just shipped off Ariel Lassiter, Roy Lassiter's son, over to Montreal. So,
yep.
All right. So, do you think that 2001 team, if it doesn't fold and it keeps competing, do you think it wins a title eventually? Like, would this team have been successful if they would have been able to just play it out? Like, how would this team have looked over the last 20 some odd years, 21, 22 years?
I often wonder that. And I want to, there's a couple things. So the 2002 season, LA Galaxy won their first MLS Cup, led by El Pescadito, the little fish, Carlos Ruiz, who came to Dallas and is a super cool dude, by the way. So they won, and they were not better, in my opinion, than the Fusion. The Fusion were world-class better. And Ray Hudson and John Trask went to DC United. Yeah, so Richard Greenberg's talking about the 90s DC teams were
El Diablo Echeverri.
Yes, I mean, they were fantastic. But Ray went to DC United, and in the 2002-2003 season, laying the groundwork for what happens in the 2004 season when DC wins their, to date, last MLS Cup. And John goes on the record and talks about how when they got to DC, they were pitched to come to DC because it was a similar rebuild, I'm using air quotes here, to the Miami Fusion project. They got there and went, no, this is a larger rebuild. This is a big deal. There's not a lot to work with. There's a lot of clashing going on. The infrastructure is different. Like it was very problematic, but they went to work, and they put people out there, and they put them in their positions, and they instilled a level of confidence. And I'm not saying that Peter Novak, who came in 2004, didn't do anything, but I am saying he had a lot better team to work with than when Ray Hudson and John Trask got there. So if you apply what they were able to do in 2002 and 2003, which led to the 2004 MLS Cup championship,
with
but you start with that 2001 team, I don't know how you don't continue to dominate. They had this has to be said. They had Preki, and Miami was the only MLS team Preki played for that wasn't Kansas City. And I still to this day do not know how they got. That's probably a Ray Hudson story, but for some reason Preki became available. I don't know, maybe he was upset in Kansas City, he didn't like the barbecue after a while, I'm not sure.
Could be.
But he came to Miami, and John Trask says, John Trask and Doug Hamilton, rest in peace at the time, said, Ray, where are you going to play Preki? And Ray's like, you don't find a place to play Preki. You put him on the field and you put people around him. You just say, go be incredible. And John tells the story that he went to go pick up Preki because they didn't have people that could go pick up players at the time, right? MLS and 2001, shoestring budget. And he goes to pick him up, and he calls him by his full name. And John said, I'd been in the Serbian league. I had had some experience there. So he calls him by his full name with the right pronunciation. Preki turns around and looks at him, and John says, hey, Ray Hudson's not interested in a retirement tour. Ray Hudson is not interested in half of you. You're not going to come in and play good for one game and get an assist every now and then. No, you're the linchpin to this team. We're building something special here, and Ray Hudson wants you to show up and be all of you. And that was day one. Day one, expectations were set. Preki comes in, is the linchpin to that team.
That is a story.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end here, and now that you came off that story, I did want to know, are there any other, because I know that you've recorded some episodes, like you said, that aren't released yet, any stories that you could share with us that, would tickle our pickle a bit, or interesting and funny?
One thing that I thought was really interesting when I was talking to Alex Pineda-Chacon that I didn't realize was he trained with Miami in, I think it was 99. It may have been 98, but he trained with them. And the coach at the time, if it was 98, it would have been Cacho. If it was 99, it would have been Ivo Wortman, said, hey, you're excellent. Do you want to, are you available? And he's like, no, I'm just coming through here to train. I'm playing with Olympia in Honduras.
He just randomly trained with us.
So that was the thing with MLS at the time, is you would have players coming through town and just being like, hey, I've got my gear. Can I just run alongside and train? And people would be like, yeah, sure. Whatever. No, minimal security, not a big deal. Whatever. Now people are like, wait a minute, who's training and where are they from and what are their stats?
Right.
Back then people were like, oh, it's another guy training with the team. Okay. Whatever. And then that was it. So he had a brush with Miami. And then in 2001, he had an opportunity to go to La Liga, and the coach got fired. And so the opportunity fell out, and he had heard through I forget, I'll have to go back when editing the episode, but he had heard that Miami was in the market for a playmaker. And so he said, I got my tapes. I don't know if they were Betamax or VHS. And I gave them to my agent, which was his friend. and was like, get these in the hand of the people in Miami. So he gave it to Ray. Ray saw it and was like, I want to call him right now. Can you 3-way call me with him? And Alex didn't speak English at the time. So they're like translating, going back and forth, and they work out a deal.
Yeah.
They fly him down, and he's like, I came in, I thought it was going to be Messi. I thought it was going to be the playmaker. I've always been the playmaker. Get there. He's like, we have Preki. We have a playmaker. Again, where am I going to go? So he starts on the bench. They put him in the last 30 minutes of the first game. He gets 2 goals. Starts on the bench again. They put him in. He gets more goals. Like, all right, well, we got to play you.
Yeah.
So they adjust the formation so they can get both of them on the field. And Alex said, I still kept trying to come back and get the ball and come back and get the ball. And then Diego Serna said, no, let's stay up high. Let's let them get the ball to us. And Alex said, so finally, and this is going to be the episode title. He said, finally, one day I went, fine, I'll score goals. Fine. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, just give me the ball. Like, I was trying to feed you, but you're going to feed me. So fine. And he was like, and most of my goals were just one-touch finishes. They were just finishes. I didn't even strike the ball.
Diego Serna is one of the more polarizing figures from those 4 years.
Yep.
Now, my understanding is that he might have been a bit of a hothead.
Yeah.
Was he? Have you heard any interesting stories about Diego Serna since you started doing this?
It was I asked Alex about this actually. So it's covered on the podcast, and he speaks to it a lot better than I can, but I'll try and summarize. And he said there was a couple things, right? Diego liked to play well, and he liked to score, and he liked to win. And I think some of it was a bit of a language barrier, right? I mean, he didn't have really anybody he could have like as a buddy right there at the time. You know, he's playing, people are coming and people are going, and he's the guy, and he's supposed to be scoring all the goals, but he's not communicating as clearly as some of the other players. So obviously he's getting frustrated. Said, I came in instantly. Neither one of us really spoke English. We're thick as thieves. We're talking, we're communicating. It's like we go out every single day, every single night, every single time. We're going out. We're going out with our significant others, like we're going out. We're talking football constantly because we're both from football countries. We love it. So we're talking about, well, let me try this. It's like, then we both start scoring. And so we're getting a little competitive. He's like, but then I always tell him, he said, I tell Diego, and John mentions that the personality of Alex, and I saw when it came out, is such that he's so welcoming and open that he was never going to be an ego clash with anybody. And so he tells Diego, he's like, I'll pass you the ball, and I promise I'm never going to be selfish and I need you to pass it back to me. I'll pass it to you. You pass it to me. We'll win. And he's like, and that's exactly what happened. He said we were friendly, competitive, but we got the best out of each other. And Jimmy Rooney even talks about in his episode that that's when you really saw Diego open up and light up and really tap into that potential, was when Alex was right there with him. Batman, Robin, Batman, Superman. There you go. Luis talking about Mastroeni. We didn't even mention Mastroeni, right? But Mastroeni, manager of Real Salt Lake, was the fan favorite. That's correct.
And Joe, listen, you're dropping dimes, because I was also looking at Diego Serna, and it seems like he must have been like full of himself, but that sort of story opens up a little bit of personality and a little bit of I guess wanting to be able to play within his team, but in a very competitive nature. So that's interesting. That's interesting for sure, right, Danny?
Yeah. Now that he brought up Mastroni, before we sign off, right, because we're coming up against the hour, are there any other players that maybe somebody that doesn't know too much of the history of Miami Fusion could look into or should know about? Because, for example, a lot of people don't know about Chacon. A lot of people just remember Pibe. They might remember who else? Pibe is the one. I mean, obviously, because I'm Colombian, maybe I'm biased, but that's the first one that comes to my mind.
Yep.
Chacon, Serna, like who else? Somebody I wasn't familiar with the Fusion was a big time name, or like Lewis said, a fan favorite that people just don't recognize or aren't familiar with. I mean, Chris Henderson, for those of you that don't know, was on the team in 2001 also.
And Alex talked about that he got real close with Chris because he said, I saw Chris all the time in the national team. So Chris obviously playing for the U.S. and Alex playing for the Honduran national team. He said we played against each other all the time. So I knew who Chris was. I knew he was good, and I was excited to play with him. There was a lot of players that passed through. You had like Kyle Beckerman was a rookie, right? In sort of that last season. And then we talked about Nick Raimondo, and we talked about Ian Bishop.
I think a lot of people don't realize that Nick Raimondo started with the Fusion.
That's right. We started with the Fusion. He moved to DC. He moved to DC along with John Trask and Ray Hudson. Brian Dunseth as well, current broadcaster. He's going to be on the show. He was on that team. And there's a heartbreaking story. John Trask talks about when the Fusion were told they were contracting. All of the staff was in a tiny ass conference room, and they were on speakerphone, and they were told on speakerphone, "You're done. That's it. Game over." Brutal. And John said, "I probably shouldn't say this, but that conference phone went flying across the room. Ray was furious, understandably, very passionate, right? That was it. He said, I walk out. I'm in disbelief. Brian Dunseth pulls up in a car. He said, notices something's wrong, rolls down his window and says, what's up? I tell him, we're done. We're finished. Dunseth rolls up his window, pulls out, and he's like, that's the last time I ever saw Brian Dunseth in person.
Oh, that's brutal.
I have one last question, and then I'll pass it over to Chris if he has any other questions. Anybody in the chat wants to ask any other questions before we sign off. When they found out that they were no longer going to be playing, did that happen like soon after getting eliminated from the playoffs and after that season ended? Or was it like right before the following season? Like when exactly did that happen? Because honestly, I've never really, I don't remember a timeline as to when it became official. That's it. Miami Fusion is no more.
It was pretty soon after MLS Cup. I don't remember the exact timeline. I think John mentions it on the episode, but it was pretty soon thereafter the season had ended. And then Jim Rooney talks about how it was days before training camp when they had the dispersal draft with all the players in a room in a conference room. So there was a little bit of time in between being told you're done and the dispersal draft happening, but it all happened pretty quick. We know how short these MLS off seasons are anyways. I mean, that turnaround was pretty significant. And speaking of Jim Rooney, I see him hanging out in the chat. There he is, the legend himself, Captain Rooney. Yes.
And he mentions Kyle Beckerman and Lazo Alvana, Jeff Bilic, I guess.
Yeah. Jeff Bilic,
yeah, Bilic. They were just starting careers and great teammates. Big part of the Fusion. I mean, it's a shame to kind of hear how it sort of got dismembered and in the fashion that it was. I mean, the explanations that you're giving are literally opening my eyes. Because, like I told you before we even started the podcast, I thought that the reason that they lost the team was going to be like cocaine and hookers infused, but that's not the case at all. I mean, and it's a sad thing to hear because a team that's just getting as high as they've gotten within the 4-year history to be brought down like a ton of bricks. That's for the people that you're speaking to. It's got to be one of the hardest things that they've probably ever had to experience. And quite honestly, I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be easy or not just easy to experience, but something they're never going to forget.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you remember Fernando Fiore when we brought it up. He said, "Man, I don't even like talking about it because it brings a tear to my eye."
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that were involved that still feel it heavy in their heart.
He was very passionate. He was very passionate about that.
Every time I've spoken to someone and we start talking, it's really funny. It's fun for me. I start talking to him. You know, it's a little casual at first. We're telling a few stories. About halfway through every single one of the recordings, I just see something take over. I see their eyes light up. They start going back to a place and they're in it. Like you can just see.
Yeah.
Like John Trask talked about being on the sidelines and being able to call a goal 4 passes before it happened because he just knew. And I could see him going back to that moment. Jim's talking about playing and being on the field and being with the guy. He talks about being in the locker room and Ray telling him, you know, hey, I got to treat you this way. Hold on. Wait, what? And then you can just see, I can see him back in the locker room. He's talking about the MLS All-Star game, which he had an infamous moment where people said he was doing an homage to Brandy Chastain at the time, who did the goal celebration at the 99 World Cup.
That was
He's
a great
was
story.
I? Was I? But you see these guys go flash right back to those moments. And it's incredible. It's fun for me. And while it is extremely sad and disappointing how it ended, I think what's cool about this ability to honor this legacy is to really frame it in a way of, hey, Miami Fusion were trailblazers. They were trendsetters. They were really ahead of their time in so many different ways. And if you look at the careers of some of these guys, we talked about Nick Raimondo, Kyle Beckerman, Pablo Mastroeni. You look at the careers that some of these guys went on to have.
Yeah.
It is the fabric of MLS.
Yeah. Like you said, even the 2004 DC championship, if the Fusion don't get dismantled, they might not get that chip. We might be celebrating something like that.
Yes.
What would have happened if Freddie Adu had come to the Fusion? What would have happened?
Freddie
That's
Adu,
big.
that's a name. That's a name. 14-year-old megastar. All right. If you guys are not yet following Joe Shaw or the podcast, well, you know what? You plug it. You
Sure.
can plug it much better than I can.
Sure. So there's a couple ways. So the official title of the episode is 25 for 25, the story of the Miami Fusion from those who lived it. You can get that wherever you subscribe to podcasts. I would ask, as you're rating and review, 5-star rating and reviewing Battered Herons, since you're already on the platform anyways, just go ahead and switch on over to 25 for 25, throw a 5-star rating, give us a nice review. It helps both of our shows out. It really goes a long way. So I appreciate that. And then if you're on Facebook or Instagram, it's at Miami Fusion Pod, POD. So we're putting out some retro content. I'm putting out like retrospectives of the 1998 season. So I'll put a little image out, a little bit of match facts. If you're trying to educate yourself on what happened, you can go. We're about to be, I will say this as an aside, we're about to be coming up on some US Open Cup from 1998. And the US Open Cup, the Miami Fusion, we talk about what came before lays the foundation for what comes next. That 2000 team made a run all the way to the finals of the US Open Cup, losing barely to Chicago 2-1. Some great stories in John's episode. He talks about going to Saginaw, Michigan and playing the Michigan Bucks, a premier development league team, and winning in penalty kicks because it was a Wild West shootout of a game. You got to go listen to that. So we're covering that. We're going to be doing some US Open Cup stuff. And truly, and on Twitter, I'm at Detox Joe. DTALKS is the main show that I do, and then Joe JOE. So I'm putting out some content and hyping stuff there. So yeah, you can find me anywhere, and we're just having fun. We're living in the 90s and early 2000s because who wouldn't want to?
Let me tell you something. Chris lives in the 90s, and I'm not just talking sports. I'm talking music, everything.
Yes.
If he could,
yes, I do.
So this is like right down his alley. And don't be surprised if 25 for 25 changes to 45 for 45, because we have a lot of people on the guest list from what I'm hearing. So I'm looking forward to catching every episode. I'm glad that you took the time to jump on, because this is a project that I think is going to be awesome. I have a love for the Miami Fusion that almost makes no sense, because I only went to one game. And I mean, like I said, I was a teenager. It was more than 25, or it was 25 years ago that it started. But I'm telling you, we have to make that theme night come. And even if it's just one night, give me that theme night. Give me the blue and yellow smoke bombs. I am ready.
What did 98 Degrees say? Give me just one night, una noche, right? I mean, that's all we need, right? A little bit different context, but
that's all. One time,
extremely different context. But for sure, this is something that, like Danny said, I'm looking forward to, because I think history just in general is a beautiful thing, and history in sports in particular, especially for the MLS, I'm really interested in, because I'm trying to get as much knowledge and things in my brain, just so I can be better at what I do here with the Battered Herons. So it's something that I can definitely say I appreciate you taking the time to do, not just the podcast, but for sure for joining us here and helping not just our fans and people here in the chat know a little bit more, but myself as well. So it's definitely appreciated on my end.
And One World One Goal chimes in. Hola, mi gente. It's Italia of the aficionados. Love the series and need a tissue for the last one. I haven't had a chance to hear the last one, but I'm looking forward to it, as everybody needs to check it out. There you go, Joe.
There it is.
And then she jumps on. Thank you, Joe, for doing this series. Diego and I have been trying to set this Fusion reunion up for years. Was delayed by the pandemic, and Beckham promised to honor our past history.
If it's a Beckham promise, we'll cash in the Beckham buck. There we go.
There we go. Before he leaves, because I heard he's selling the team to Messi. But that's no, I'm joking. I haven't
heard it
heard
was
that.
just
I'm
a
joking.
percentage. I heard it was just a percentage, right? Right.
It's Beckham's percentage. I've heard. Again, I'm joking. I have no idea. But again, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Again, like and subscribe. YouTube. Go ahead, give 5 stars to 25 for 25, which will soon be 50 for 50. And Chris, do you have anything else for the people?
No, again, Joe, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time. You know, I enjoyed it, and I'm pretty sure Danny enjoyed it, and everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for chiming in. I know for sure that you guys enjoyed it, Joe. It was definitely a pleasure.
Thank you all for the invite. I enjoyed this show because it allows
Much
me to get
appreciated.
more connected with Inter Miami, and so I'm excited. I appreciate y'all.
Yes. No,
Awesome.
and I appreciate that you coming in, changed up the colors a little bit, because I mean I love the pink, but it was nice changing it up, blue and yellow. I like it. We got to get that theme going. All right. Well, thank you everybody that listened all the way to the end. We appreciate you guys as always, and we will be back next Monday. No, not next Monday. There's no game to recap this weekend. We'll be coming back next Wednesday, previewing Houston. We have a podcast from Houston joining us, so we could preview that Houston Dynamo game, and I guess we'll be talking about our new players and all that other stuff. But until then, since we don't have a lot of Inter Miami going on for the next week, go ahead, lay back, listen to some Miami Fusion history, and hit up your boy Joe Shaw. Thank you again, and we will talk to you Wednesday. Jesus, it's gonna be hard to remember. Have a good one.